Welcome to Murder by Nature, where the darkness of true crime, unsolved disappearances, and chilling mysteries come to life. I am your host, Jazmin Ramirez, and if you're brave enough to join us today, prepare for a journey into the unknown. Now you're probably wondering, where have I been? I let you guys know that I was supposed to have surgery on the 26th of February, and that ended up being railroaded by an emergency surgery on Valentine's Day. Yay me! So I did not get to prep like I wanted to for my surgery because I ended up going into the hospital on the 13th and they decided that they needed to remove it emergently, and I was in the hospital for about 24 hours after my surgery and then a lot of pain. It wasn't as bad as I thought. I didn't get the weird bubble pains that everyone was talking about, but I did get like a lot of I guess it's the muscle pain from when you're trying to move, laugh, cough, really doing anything. That sucked real bad. So that was happening, and I have a 10-month-old, so trying to care for him, trying to care for everyone else. I couldn't drive, I couldn't do anything. So it kind of put me in this weird mood. I didn't have podcast episodes recorded. I couldn't really sit up on my laptop because it kind of hurt, but I couldn't lay down because that hurt. So I'm finally 2 weeks post-op now, and I'm feeling a little bit better. I'm able to sit at my desk. I was able to sit at my desk for work. So I know I was going to try and release video episodes. That just was not going to be able to happen with how I was recovering. I still have one area I can't sit a certain way because it feels like there's like a stitch. It's like a bubble. I need to call them. But it feels like a stitch, so that hurts if I lean on the side too much. But we're slowly getting back into the groove of things. This episode today, I put a lot into the research. It was a case that I actually found from someone else just doing a short story on it. I've never heard of this episode, and it kind of makes your bones shiver on the inside if you're a parent or anyone that has children in school. So we're going to dive into this episode today. Our references for this podcast is luminalpod.com, abcnews.go, webpage.com, caselawfindlaw.com, thecinemaholic, upi.com, cosmopolitan.com, dailymail.co.uk, people.com, and weau.com. The streets of Eau Claire, Wisconsin were quiet, lined with cozy houses and the sound of children playing in the backyards. It was the kind of place where parents felt safe letting their kids ride their bikes until the streetlights flickered on. But in the fall of 1995, that sense of security was shattered. A girl vanished without a trace. One moment she was there, a bright, imaginative 13-year-old with dreams of becoming a writer, and the next she was gone. Her name was Jessyca Mullenberg. From the time she could hold a pencil, Jessyca had been a storyteller. Writing was more than like a hobby. It was a passion for her. She filled notebooks with stories, her mind constantly spinning new ideas. It was a gift that made her stand out, even at a young age. But as she would later learn, talent can sometimes attract the wrong kind of attention. Jessyca's life has already seen its fair share of changes. After her parents' divorce, she moved to another city in Wisconsin with her mother, stepfather, and 2 younger brothers. But she missed Eau Claire. She would miss how it felt just so familiar to her old neighborhood, but she still would visit often. She spent weekends with her father in the house that she once called home, and it was during those visits that she would meet a man who would change the course of her life forever. The autumn air was crisp, and when a new neighbor moved in next door to Jessica's father's house, his name was Stephen Oliver. At first, no one paid attention to him. He was just another man settling into this quiet neighborhood, a school teacher's aide, the kind of person that you expected to be kind, patient, maybe even a little forgetful. He wasn't loud or boastful. He wasn't flashy. He kind of just blended in. But soon, people began to notice that Oliver had a particular interest in one that revolved around children. He worked as an English teacher and a writing tutor. He would conduct workshops and help young students hone in their skills. He spoke passionately about storytelling, about how nurturing creativity was good, about the magic of turning imagination into words on page. And parents saw a man that was devoted to education, someone that genuinely cared about their kids. And Jessyca, she saw an opportunity. She had always loved writing and had always believed in the power of a good story. It was her escape. her passion, her way of understanding the world. So when Oliver took interest into her work, she felt something rare, a kind of validation that every young artist craves. He didn't just say that she had talent, he made her believe it too. He promised to help her publish her stories, to introduce her to people that would make her dreams come true, and to a 13-year-old girl hungry for success, it was a dream come true. The conversation stretched into the long evenings, spilling from discussions about writing into something deeper. And he asked about her life, her dreams, her struggles. He made her feel important in a way that very few adults had. But not everyone was taken into his charm. Now we're going to step back a little bit. Everything might seem ordinary at first, but there's a twist no one saw coming. Now, what if I told you Jessyca didn't simply meet Stephen Oliver on that chilly autumn day? Instead, their fateful encounter began much earlier, when she was just a simple third grader at school. Back then, the days were filled with innocent chatter of young minds and the promise of endless opportunities. Oliver wasn't yet the man whose dark shadows would later define her existence. At that time, he was merely a teacher's aide who volunteered after school, running a workshop that served as a creative sanctuary for eager students. It was a club where stories flew and as freely as the laughter of children would be, where every scribbled word into a step of a world of dreams and adventures. Even as the after-school club offered safe havens and creative adventures, a dark truth lurked beneath the surface. Jessyca finds that Oliver isn't simply a kind mentor. He's obsessed with her. What begins in the innocent corridors of her elementary school soon transform into something far more disturbing. Now, as the years kept unfolding, her family kind of saw something happening here, and they decided that they were going to seek a fresh start by moving to a new Wisconsin town. Yet Oliver's presence remained inescapable. With the unnerving persistence, he followed them from one town to the next, his shadow lingering no matter where they tried to rebuild their lives. And then, in a calculated act of intrusion, he moved in directly across the street from her father's house. It's like if every part of her journey, every hope for a new beginning, it was just being watched and controlled by a man who was so fixated on her with no bounds, a constant, unyielding reminder that the very person who once offered words of encouragement now harbors a dangerous obsession, one that no one can see coming that's going to alter her life forever. Now, at the same time, in an environment where it should be safe, a room for growth, for expression, Jessyca's facing the daily reality that undermines her confidence. From third grade to seventh grade, Stephen Oliver shifted from the role of a mentor into someone who inflicts emotional harm. Instead of nurturing her love for writing, he's repeatedly telling her she's stupid, she's useless, she's ugly. These remarks deliver casually yet a deliberate, steady erosion of her self-esteem. What might have been dismissed as occasional criticism from, ongoing things became an ongoing pattern of verbal abuse. Each day, the weight of his words left her feeling isolated and unsure of her worth, and the fear of future mistreatment, along with the unspoken threat that accompanied his harsh comments. This forced her into a suffocating silence that even as her creative spirit longed for that desperation of encouragement and understanding, like that toxic behavior that you see in adults. You want to feel what they were giving you in the beginning, but then it turns toxic. And you're just spent years and years searching for where and when that was going to come back. And now, from the very beginning, Jessyca's mother, Monica, felt uneasy. She did not like the feeling that settled in her bones whenever Oliver was near. There was something about him, something that just did not sit right. Now, when you go back and forth with the moving from town to town to town, that kind of was sparking a little bit of this, but that happens after this. What she was feeling, it wasn't like blatant. It was just a feeling, a mother's intuition. She was watching the way that he hovered, always finding an excuse to be around, the way that he was interested in Jessyca, and it stretched beyond just simple encouragements, the way that he seemed to latch onto her, as though she was more than just another student in his workshop. Monica voiced her concerns, but what can she say? He did nothing wrong that she knew of. See, he was respected, trusted. No one else seemed alarmed. or knew the person he truly was. So she did what many parents do when they can't seem to put their finger on the fear. You know, when you're like, something doesn't seem right, but I'm going to wait. Well, not me. I'm a psychopath with my kids. But she wanted to just like push this aside. She had no actual reason for not liking this man. So he was a teacher's aide. He was well respected. He was all this person. She didn't want to, she was just like, okay. But this is all because Oliver spent years perfecting this act that he had, years crafting his disguise, earning trust, embedding himself into the fabric of communities, just like this one. But for Jessyca, the weight of Oliver's presence was suffocating. What lurked beneath the surface was far more darker than anyone could imagine, and Monica had a right to feel the way she did. His grip over Jessyca wasn't just psychological. It was physical, violent, and terrifying. Behind closed doors, his cruelty had no bounds. He began sexually assaulting her in his house, and he would tell her that she did something wrong, and he would order her to the kitchen, and if she didn't touch him the way that he wanted, he'd hit her. Eventually, he was forcing her into intercourse and oral sex, sometimes twice a day. And his abuse didn't stop there. In order to not be caught, he would punch her into the back of her legs and her back, and he would strike her with a broom. He was doing all of this just like a very toxic spouse would. He was trying to do these things that people wouldn't catch on to. And he terrorized her with threats of what he would do if she ever told anyone about this. As Jessyca tried to resist, tried to stop it, he stabbed her in the stomach with the tip of a knife, leading her to bleed everywhere, but refusing to take her to the hospital. Instead, he ordered her to bandage herself up and threatened her that if anyone found out, he would murder her entire family. Murder her entire family. Like, who does that to a child? After that, she didn't resist anymore. It wasn't submission, as more of survival. Every attempt to fight back had been met with swift, brutal consequences, and the threats weighed heavier on her than any physical wound. The fear of what he might do to her family, this kept her locked in silence. Why her, she asked herself. That question lingered in the back of her mind, an echo that she could not escape. Psychologists say that predators have an instinct, an ability to spot like a vulnerability, like a wolf picking out the weakest in the herd. Maybe Oliver had sensed that in her. Maybe he had always known, because long before he came into her life, Jessyca had been hurt, already been broken. She was just 5 years old when that first betrayal happened. The father of her dad's girlfriend, a man who was supposed to be a caretaker, a guardian, became her first abuser. It started in her bedroom, and the shadows stretched long as he whispered instructions she didn't understand, but obeyed out of fear. He touched her, made her touch him, and stole something from her that she didn't even know she had to begin with. Then came the second, a roommate of her father's, another man who saw her not as a child, but an opportunity. His demands were worse, harsher. The things he forced upon her became the nightmares that played in her head night over night until it became her reality. By the time Oliver came along, Jessyca had already learned what it meant to be powerless. Maybe he sensed that. Maybe that's why he chose her. Because she had already been silenced before, and now, once again, she was trapped in a world that no one can hear her scream. The morning of September 16th, 1995, felt like the start of something big. Jessyca was anxious but excited. Kind of that nervous energy that comes with the possibility of a dream coming true. Oliver had promised her that today was the day. She was finally going to meet real publishers, people who could bring her writing to life. I'm gonna pause right here. This man is following you from place to place to place. As a parent, why would you still let your child go with him? That doesn't make sense to me. But that's just my viewpoint. She had spent the night at her father's house, unaware of the promise of opportunity, was nothing more than just a carefully crafted lie. Oliver had spun this story so well, so convincing, that no one questioned it. He built trust over the years, embedded himself into their lives like a parasite, and now a simple offer, he had managed to get exactly what he wanted. Jessyca climbed into his car, completely unaware that she was about to disappear. This trip was supposed to be just a short one, just a drive from Eau Claire to Madison where the meeting was supposed to take place. But as the city began to fade behind them and the miles stretched into this unfamiliar territory, something inside Jessyca shifted. The excitement dulled, giving away of this uneasy sense that something was wrong. She asked him questions. Where was the meeting? Where were they going to be seeing them? Why did it feel like they'd been driving for too long? But Oliver was prepared. He had answers, smooth, effortless. The meeting had been rescheduled. They needed to take a detour. Just a little bit further, he assured her. Almost there. Only they weren't almost there. They weren't going to Madison. They weren't going to meet publishers. Jessyca wasn't going home. The last thing Jessyca remembered before slipping into this unconsciousness was the hum of the car beneath the tires, the rhythmic passing of streetlights outside the car window. But when she woke up, everything changed. Panic had hit her like a tidal wave. Her hands were tied behind her back, her legs restrained with rope looped beneath the seats. The reality of her situation crashed over her in an instant. She wasn't just on a road trip anymore. She was trapped. Oliver sat calmly in the driver's seat, his hands steady on the wheel, face unreadable, when she began to cry, to struggle, to beg. His voice cut through her fear like a blade. I'm taking you, he said, and there's nothing you can do about it. Terror strangled her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't scream. He simply stated it as a fact, as if her fate has already been decided, and as if she just ceased to be the person that she was in that moment when she stepped into that car. As the car sped down the highway, her mind raced through every possibility, every way to escape, every way to scream for help. But Oliver anticipated everything. Any time they stopped for gas, he warned her. If she made a sound, if she tried to run, if she did anything to alert anyone, her family would pay the price. The road stretched endlessly, leading them farther and farther from home. They passed every unfamiliar city, the landscape shifted, the hours bled together. Then the car came to a stop. Not in Madison, not anywhere near Wisconsin. They were in Kansas City. Jessyca's pulse hammered into the ears of Oliver as he pulled her out of the car. The airport loomed ahead. Its bright lights offered a fleeting moment of hope. Surely someone would notice a bound, terrified girl boarding a flight with a strange man. Someone had to see. Someone had to stop him. But Oliver thought of everything. He pressed a knife against the small of her back as they began to walk. His grip firm, his tone casual, as he whispered threats into her ear. You make a sound and I'll kill you right here. You do as I say or your family dies. And so she did as he said. They boarded the flight under false names, David and Sydney Johnson. No one questioned them. No one looked twice. To the world, they were just father and his daughter traveling together. And when they landed in Houston, Oliver wasted no time securing their next hideout. A Days Inn motel became Jessyca's new prison, her identity erased by the lies he spun. He told the hotel manager that he was a grieving single father, that he just lost his wife and son in a terrible car accident. His voice cracked just enough with sadness. His eyes carried enough pain, and the manager believed him. Not only did they give him a room, but they also offered him a job as a painter, giving him access to unconstructed rooms where no one would hear her cry. Back in Wisconsin, a nightmare was unfolding in real time. Jessyca's mother, Monica, was just starting to settle into her evening when the phone rang. The moment she picked up and heard the panic in her ex-husband's voice, her stomach twisted into a knot. Jessyca's missing. The words barely registered at first. The room seemed to tilt, the air sucked from her lungs. No, she whispered, shaking her head in denial, like it can reverse time. No, that's not possible. But it was. A scream tore from her throat, raw and primal, the kind that only a mother could understand. The sound of losing a child into the unknown, a grief so immediate, so overwhelming, it was like something was drowning inside of her. Her mind raced, spiraling through every terrifying possibility. Was Jessyca safe? Was she cold? Was she alone? Was she being hurt? Then came the worst thought of all. Was she even still alive? Most parents of missing children are left to grapple with the one agonizing question: who took them? But Monica and her ex-husband didn't have to wonder. They knew exactly who had taken their daughter. Stephen Oliver, the trusted teacher aide, the mentor, the man who embedded himself into Jessica's life for years, slowly, methodically, like a predator stalking its prey. The man that they never truly trusted, but never imagined that he would go this far. Panic quickly turned into urgency. They had a name. They had a face. Now they had to bring Jessyca home. But as the hours stretched into days, the days blurred into weeks, one chilling truth became clear. Oliver had been planning this for a long, long time, and he had no intention of letting Jessyca go. Days turned into weeks, weeks bled into months, and inside that cold, lifeless motel, Jessyca Mullenberg ceased to exist. She became Cindy Johnson. Oliver made sure of it. He stripped her of her identity piece by piece, first her hair, cutting it off and dyeing it dark brown, then her clothes, swapping them for baggy, shapeless garments that masked her figure. If she looked into the mirror, she didn't recognize herself. That was the point, though. She wasn't Jessyca anymore. She was his. To the outside world, they were just another father and daughter trying to rebuild their life after this unimaginable loss. But meanwhile, Jessyca was kept out of sight, locked inside this block of a motel room that no one checked. Oliver made sure of that too. If he left for work, he locked her inside. And if she stepped out of line, he tied her to the bed or hid her. Her world shrank from the size of that room, and the walls closed in tighter and tighter after every passing day. At first, she fought. She believed her parents were looking for her. She believed that she could be saved. And that hope, that frail thing, Oliver knew how to break it. At first, he just planted the idea. Your family doesn't love you. Then he watered it. No one's looking for you. And eventually the lie took root, spreading until it consumed everything. She tried calling home once, desperate to hear those voices. But every number was wrong. It took her a while to realize why, though. Oliver tampered with the phone. A 2 might have dialed a 5. A 7 might have been a 3. Every attempt led nowhere. Another dead end. Another reason to believe that he had been telling her this all along. So she stopped trying. She stopped believing. The memories of her past faded, blurred, rewritten by Oliver's words. He took her stories from a life that she never lived, fabricated memories of a childhood she never had. And after a while, she stopped questioning them. It's kind of like when you're put into this little room and someone's telling you, no, this is what happened. No, this is what happened. You just start to believe them. Because when someone tells you the same thing over and over, when every moment is a reminder that you are powerless, that you are alone, you stop fighting. You start believing, and that's the scariest part of all. Back in Wisconsin, Jessica's parents were not giving up. With the knowledge of who took their daughter, it fueled this relentlessness in their search. They weren't going to stop. They distributed over 15,000 missing person flyers across the country, hoping that someone, somewhere, would recognize them. It happened late at night, long after Jessyca stopped hoping for a rescue. Oliver was asleep in the bed beside her, his presence suffocating, weight of even this unconsciousness. The motel room was silent, except for the hum of the heater and the distant sound of traffic outside. Jessyca laid still, staring at the ceiling, trapped in a prison without bars. She had no idea, miles away, a woman was about to change everything. Lily Roy, a hotel worker, had just finished her shift when she flipped on the TV. America's Most Wanted Final Justice was on. It was a familiar theme song that filled her apartment, and she wasn't paying much attention until a picture flashed across the screen. A man. His face was familiar. Too familiar. The name Stephen Oliver appeared beneath his mugshot, along the side of this desperate plea from law enforcement. Have you seen this man? Lily's stomach dropped. She had seen him. He was here, right here in the day's end, painting walls and moving through the halls as if he belonged. And the girl in the picture, her face had changed. Her hair was different, but there was something about her eyes. Lily grabbed the phone, trembling with her fingers, and she dialed the number on the screen. I know where he is. Around 2 a.m., Jessyca startled awake to the sound of pounding on the door. But before she could even sit up, the door crashed open. The bright beams of light flooded the room, heavy boots pounding against the floor. She heard a shuffle, a deep voice shouting orders. Oliver barely had time to react before he was shoved against the wall, his face pressed into the peeling motel wallpaper. Jessyca shrank back against the mattress, shaking. She didn't understand what was happening. Then a man kneeled before her, his voice firm but kind. "What is your name?" he asked. Jessyca opened her mouth. The answer was automatic, programmed. "Sydney Johnson." The officer shook his head. "No." He said gently, "Your name is Jessyca." She blinked. The name didn't feel right. It didn't belong to her. She turned to Oliver, her lifeline, her captivator, the only person who had spoken to her for months. But Oliver wasn't looking at her. He was handcuffed, being dragged away. He wouldn't save her now. "Jessyca," the agent repeated, and then he pulled out a photograph. The moment she saw it, something inside of her cracked open. A woman's face. Soft, warm eyes, filled with something that she hadn't seen in so long. Love. A man beside her. His smile familiar in a way that made her chest ache. Other photos followed. Her bedroom, her childhood home, memories that she'd forgotten, stolen from her, one piece at a time. Her breath hitched. She knew these people. She knew these places. A sob tore from her throat as reality hit her all at once. She wasn't Sydney Johnson. She was Jessyca Mullenberg. She had a home, she had a family, and they never stopped looking for her. The agents worked tirelessly to break the fog in Jessica's mind. From the moment they rescued her, they asked her questions after questions, showing her pictures, repeating her name, trying to get her to remember the life that had been stolen from her. But the memories felt distant, blurred by months of manipulation and fear. She sat in the FBI's office, numb as the hours stretched on. The world outside felt too unreal, too bright, too loud, too different from the dark motel she had once come to accept as her entire existence. And then the moment came. The doors to the airport terminal slid open, and through the crowd of officers and flashing cameras, Jessyca saw her mother. It was like something inside her snapped back into place. She didn't need anyone to tell her what to do. Her feet were already moving before she can even think, before she can breathe. She ran. Her mother's arms wrapped around her, pulling her in, hoping, like just for a minute, that she would never have to let go again. Jessyca felt the warmth, the safety, the love that had been stripped from her for so long. It was real. She was real. 105 days. That's how long it had been since Oliver had taken her. And now she was home. Around them, reporters shouted, cameras flashed, voices blended into the chaotic blur. None of it mattered. An agent leaned in and whispered something that sent a shiver down Jessica's spine. "At this moment," he said, you are 1 in 13 missing children in the entire country to be found alive. 13 out of thousands." Jessyca held onto her mother tighter, realizing how close she had become to being lost forever. But she wasn't lost anymore. She had been found. When the FBI stormed the Houston Days Inn and arrested Oliver, they wasted no time combing through the evidence in the room where Jessyca had been held captive. Among items collected were articles of clothing and bed sheets, stained with what seemed to be like semen, and they were sent to the FBI headquarters. This will be a very important note in the trial. This was very critical for them. By January 31st, 1996, Oliver was officially indicted on charges of kidnapping and violating of the Mann Act, which prohibited the transfer of an individual across state lines for illegal sexual activity. A week later, an attorney was appointed to represent him, and a trial date was set for June 17th. But the legal battle was far from straightforward. As the weeks trickled by, the prosecution and defense tangled over key forensic evidence. The government had notified Oliver's defense that it indeed was to introduce lab results and expert testimony regarding the motel garments. But there was a problem. The tests were still incomplete. Then, in a sudden twist, the court decided that they were going to move the trial up to June 3rd. This kind of threw both sides into a frenzy. Without the final test results, the government requested a delay. The defense, suspecting it would be better off without hard forensic evidence in play, opposed the request. The judge compromised, though, pushing the trial slightly to June 10th and then again to June 24th, allowing just enough time for forensic testing. By May 31st, the physical evidence was available for independent testing, and on June 3rd, the government's lab reports were turned over to the defense. With a little time left, the defense rushed to conduct its own testing. But when the trial commenced on June 24th, Oliver's attorneys were still waiting for the expert analysis. The prosecution moved forward, presenting damning testimonies from Jessyca herself, her mother, a witness from the motel, 2 forensic experts. The results were undisputable. DNA and testing confirmed that the semen on Jessica's underwear belonged to Oliver, backing her into a narrow account of sexual abuse. 2 days into the trial, on June 26, the defense finally received preliminary results from the independent lab. But there's no salvation for Oliver. Their findings aligned with the prosecution's. The only argument left was a weak attempt to spin that the DNA evidence claiming the semen stains were not a result of intercourse. But the judge wasn't convinced. Oliver was found guilty on both counts. A sentencing the judge took into account the immense psychological trauma that was inflicted on Jessyca. 2 levels were added to his sentencing for the lasting pain he caused her. And then another 5 levels were added for the sheer number of times he assaulted her. But in the final decision, the judge made a slight concession, lowering the level by 2 so that Oliver would receive a fixed prison term versus life. Why they did this, I don't know. The final sentence was 40 years for kidnapping and 10 years for violating the Mann Act, served concurrently. So he would do 40 and then 10. For Jessyca, justice had been served. Oliver would never hurt her again, or anyone else again. After high school, Jessyca refused to let her past define her. She enrolled at the University of Wisconsin, majoring in psychology with a minor in criminal justice law enforcement and sociology. Many doubted that a kidnapped girl burdened by trauma would even finish high school, let alone graduate from college. But the more people doubted her, the more determined she became. Last year, she walked across the stage with honors, proving them all wrong. The scars Oliver left weren't just emotional, they were physical too. He had hit her so many times that her facial bones could never fully develop, leading to 10 jaw surgeries in a single year. The pain didn't stop there. She was also diagnosed with fibromyalgia. I don't think I said that right at all. But she was also diagnosed with that, a disorder so crippling that some days she can barely walk. The long-lasting effects of her trauma manifest in post-traumatic stress disorder, forcing her to relive the horrors of her past. Certain triggers still haunt her. Planes make her uneasy because she was forced onto one the day she was taken. The smell of coffee makes her stomach churn because it always lingered on his breath. For the time, Jessyca accepted the violence as normal, and it seeped into her relationships, trapping her once again in an abusive cycle. But she found the strength to break free, rebuilding herself piece by piece, and learning that she would never tolerate that again. She will never be hit, yelled at, or degraded. Trusting others still remained difficult, but she hadn't given up on love. And she met her boyfriend, Kurt, at a bowling center where they both worked. What began as a friendship grew into something real over the 2 years. And those walls between them, she was starting to let him in, one step at a time. I do want to put here that she also ended up marrying him, and they have 2 boys together. I didn't put where her life is in this moment, but I did want to add that in. Most of all, Jessyca refused to let Oliver win, determined to turn her suffering into a force of change, and she began speaking at schools, sharing her story to educate children and parents about the warning signs of physical and sexual abuse. She hoped that by raising awareness, she can prevent others from enduring the same horrors that she did. In a speech at a school in 2017, she opened up about the reality of being abused from a young age and a truth that she carried with her for so long. Her words were raw and powerful, a testimony to her resilience and her unwavering mission to help others recognize abuse before it's too late. Her future wasn't set in stone, but one thing was certain. She would spend the rest of her life fighting to make sure no child endures the same things she had, whether that was through advocacy, foster care work, or counseling services. She was determined to do everything in her power to prevent another child from becoming a victim. Now, Stephen Oliver, his release date is set for 2046, ensuring that he remains behind bars, far from any opportunity to hurt another child again. And that brings us to the end of another unsettling tale. As always, thank you for listening to Murder by Nature. If you've enjoyed today's podcast episode, leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening from. And be sure to turn back in next week for a brand new story that will keep you up at night. As you guys can see, I'm messing around with what days to release our episodes. I feel like Thursdays aren't always the best, but when I was releasing them on Mondays, I felt like we had a little bit more viewers. So we're going to just mess around and see what works for us. But until then, I'm Jazmin Ramirez, reminding you to stay vigilant, safe, and remember, don't get murdered, and for the love of all things darkness, don't become a murderer. You've been warned, you beautiful haunted souls.